Okay, so now comes the part where you're going to actually set up, and I really break this and be clear about this by your one-time setup stuff that you need to do. And this is create the gitignore, which I actually had you do in the setup, but in this case, I'm actually going to show you how to put the correct gitignore information for VS Code. So if you click here, you'll see that and just have that so that when we get there, you can see it. And so these commands need to be done before you do any of the workflow itself. Okay. So first go through it. I think I've already done it. So I'm only going to do this last command, but you would do, and you could copy this part and then put a space. And then this is the name you used, and then this is the email that you used. And here's where you do that. Like here, as a matter of fact, I'm going to do, let's see what I'm going to do. I'm going to do git config to see if mine is set. If not, then I'll be doing it as well. Global, and then I think it's dash dash list. Huh. I don't think it is. So let me go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and copy this. And I'll do paste. And then I'll do Rio Waller. Cool. Now the next one is the email that you used. I'm going to copy that. As long, by the way, I think it doesn't really matter what directory you're in, but it would be, we're still in this. Oh, sorry, my bad. And then I'm going to use the email that I use for my GitHub. And this is how it knows you, right? Cool. And now if I up arrow, which is a great thing to know how to do, I'm going to list that again. And okay, it wasn't set. So I'm glad I did those steps. I thought maybe since the authentication didn't come through, that one wouldn't. All right, so now let's go through this. So now for all of you, hopefully you've already done day 1 and day 2. But one of the things I had you do was create that original gitignore file, and I had you base it on Visual Studio, something I talked about when we installed it. So here's what you want to do is actually go grab this very simple, because it's just related to the gitignore. Gitignore basically says when you see these files on my local system, just ignore them. Don't put them in the version control. And you're about to see what we mean by version control if you've never seen it. So it's just saying ignore these things. So you would bring up this file and then you would paste that in. Before I did this, I did notice I forgot to do something local that I always do, which is I set auto save, and that way it automatically saves whatever I've done. I don't have to worry about hitting save. Okay, so we're ready to do the Git workflow. I'm going to do the Git workflow. I've already updated the gitignore, but the gitignore actually requires, instead of git add star, actually, let me just show you. We'll go through both. It'll be a good example because this allows you to say anything that I've changed or the specific file name. And when you're doing the gitignore, you actually have to specify the file name. Okay. So the first thing I want to do, in this case, there's 2 repos, as I've said before, right? The private and the public. And you need to do this particular step. You'll need to do these steps in both repos. So it doesn't really matter which one you do. Now, one quick thing I do often is I could just change directory into Rio W and then private. That would make my current directory. And if I do, now, by the way, had I done git status, matter of fact, let me just show you. If I did git status, which is the first, it'll tell me it can't find anything because I'm not in a repo. This folder we created is not a repo. It's just the folder that holds the repos for this class. In order for me to do that step, run git commands on a repo, I have to be in a folder that is a repo. Oh, so let me show you the other way. The quicker way I like to do this is open an integrated terminal. Oh, it's changing to PowerShell. You're not making me happy. I really do have to go fix that. So I'm going to do it again manually. Okay. So now if I do git status, now I can see and in this case, I have a file, the README file I was playing with just a minute ago. But notice even though, oh, actually, I haven't changed. Let's see if I just change, add a line, add a comment. This is a comment, right? Let me just see now if I do git status. Okay, I do see both of them, right? Both of the files that I've changed. So if I do git add star, which would be, let's see if this works. It's always, things always change. So adding it says I've made changes, now add this into the repo. And if I do git status again, notice how it still lists the gitignore, because the gitignore has a particular requirement that you actually give it the actual name. And now if I do git status, it's going to say, okay, you have two files, you've modified them. Okay, so git status, by the way, in VS Code, there's also a little indicator over here. I recommend using the command line until you get really comfortable here. Right, so we did a git status, we did git add because I did modify the file. I'm going to show you Python running in a minute. That'll be next. But then I actually had to do the git add file name for the gitignore. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit these files into the local repo, because adding them just says I've made changes. But git commit actually is going to commit those changes into the repo that I have here on my local computer. I'm going to say git, I'm going to say ignore. Oh, sorry, I should have said git ignore and read me minor updates. Doesn't matter. These messages become more important because as you already see, and this is what you were doing from the GitHub if you were doing it prior to this, which you were. Okay, so now I've committed those. And so now I'm going to use my up arrow because I've already done this, git status. So git says, hey, listen, your branch, which for us is main, is one ahead of your origin. Now, what does this mean? What this means, if I go out to GitHub and I look at my, let's get rid of this, I look at my repo, okay, for the one that I'm working at, which I believe is my private. Okay, so in this case, let's go look at my private so you can kind of see what we're talking about. So I'm going to look at the private repo. The README file, right? The GitHub was, my gitignore was done 22 hours ago. My README file as well, okay? So let's go in here, back here. Right. Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. That README file that I was playing with before was actually, and you can see this up here where that was located because I was playing around with the ones we'd already done, which is fine. Doesn't really matter, but it is really good. There's a lot going on in the screen and it's really good to kind of see it. Right. So I added a fun Git workflow example. Okay. So now if I do, again, I'm doing my git status. I'm like, oh, hey, you got a modified file, right? You've modified it. So let's do git add star. Again, I could specify the individual file, but this wildcard just makes it so much easier. And then I would do, I'm going to up arrow again because I'm getting where I've already got these commands. So I'm going to say minor change to readme.md in day one. Okay. Cool. Now what's happened here is I've been doing this Git workflow on the local system, right? All of these commands are on your local system. Committing it commits it into the repo that's here. This actually pushes that repo changes out to GitHub. Okay, so again, if let's just go look. So I want you to see this, is that the one I changed was in the 100 days in the day one. Boop, boop, boop. Looks like I haven't changed. Oh, this is from the students. Sorry, I'm on the student account. Yeah, I did that before when I showed you. So let me make sure I'm in the right one. 100 days, day one. The README file at the very end, right, has some additional content right here. Okay, so this is the point of me explaining that what you want to do once you've cloned these is only modify code here and then push your code. That's the push. Okay, So that now push my code. And if I refresh this, I can see a couple things. I can see that content showed up. I can also, if I scroll up, right, I can actually see that I did a commit 1 minute ago. I can look at my history. And most of the time, right, for our when we're coding along with the Udemy course, I want you to do this. But for this assignment, which I will talk about next, I'll just have you give the folder. But I just want you to see that what happens. Okay. So learning how to do this process is really great. So let's do one more step here, which is really now that we're and I probably am previewing a little bit of what's going to happen in the actual assignment here. But I am going to, now that I'm in the public, show you the two ways or there's actually more than that. You can run your Python code while you're in VS Code. Okay. So I am going to go to one, and by the way, if I type 100 tab, because there's only one directory with with that in the name, it's a quick way. So I hit one and tab and it automatically queried the folders and said, there it is. Oh, what happened? Ooh, must have gotten some random keystrokes in there. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to do day one. And then I have some Python files here, right? So let's say, and I could run any of them here in the command line. Sometimes I just like doing that, but you can also, whatever's open here, you can just hit run. And what we'll do is it'll change the terminal. You'll see this if I hit run. Then it just runs the code. Notice how it actually changes the terminal to have Python here, which is cool as well. I can move then back to my bash if I want. Again, one of the ways I often do this is I just type it out. I'm not sure why I like that, but I do. The other way, as we move more into Python, is the idea of running and debugging, and you definitely will see that a little later. We saw some of that already in the course as well. Okay. Let's see, what else would I want to say in here? So I've shown you the two ways to run it. Depends on, this works based on whatever is open. This works based on anything that you want to run. The debug is there as well. There'll always be something, right? So what you want to do here is actually in your public is go ahead and update that gitignore over there as well, and then you'll be ready to move on to your next item. Okay, make sure your repos. Oh, I just give you a few commands here for moving back. Oh, and then I actually ended up. I guess I had done this before, written some instructions specifically for the getignore, but you got that in this video. I hope this helped you. Again, reach out if you run into any issues here. Now that we have this set up locally for you, this is where all your code changes will go. Okay? All right.